Hey everyone, so I was in bed and I was feeling quite distressed and upset again. So I got out of bed, I did my makeup. And I thought, because I'm in a little bit of a better mood today, I feel like talking to the asthma psychologist and being truthful and saying how I really feel. I don't think I've ever... I'm trying to get through this without crying. I don't think I've ever told anyone about my self-harming. I've always made an excuse as to the reasons why I have burns. I dropped a pan on my foot. I dropped a knife on my foot. I put my hand in the oven and burnt my arm on the tray. I accidentally picked up the handle of a metal pan without using a rubber glove, when none of those things were true. They were all caused by myself, intentionally, though not consciously, and all triggered from depression, and all triggered from feeling muzzled. Now, I've been working with the asthma psychologist and we've been going through my childhood, and the email I got, because she's referred me to the community mental health team yesterday, with an urgent referral and request for me to be assessed, which seems a bit crazy, because I'm not in an urgent situation, but I think for them it is. And she put, she's got long-standing complex traumas. She suffered physical abuse, sexual abuse as a child. She was neglected. She doesn't trust people. Been in a situation now where she feels like she has to trust people, and being in a situation where she feels like she needs to rely on people has triggered her depression. So I made this sheet, and I just want to explain, because we've been making a roadmap in our psychology sessions together. We've been making a roadmap of what leads me to one of two reactions that I do get. The first reaction is probably the better one for everyone else, and that is me bottling everything up, suppressing it, giving up, feeling like, what's the point anyway? I can't do this anymore, blah blah blah. Kind of like the situation I've been in the last few weeks, and I suppressed that a lot, and eventually that suppression is overwhelming and you explode. And that's my second reaction, which is not quite so nice. I explode into a fit of rage. Everyone looks at me like, oh my god, this lady's crazy. They all look scared and terrified, and it's literally just because I've been trying to control myself, to keep this under wraps, try not to talk about how I feel. It consumes me. And then just the tiniest little thing, literally the tiniest little thing, like the size of a pen nib, is enough to just set me off into a rage. And so that's kind of what's happened this week. This last 2 weeks, I've been very vulnerable, not just in my health situation, but mentally vulnerable. I'm having to rely on people to bring me food, to bring me medication, and that's not happening properly because this is a new situation, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and I'm very much independent. I don't rely on anyone. I rely on myself and myself alone. So to have people come into my home, knowing where I live, strangers coming to my door, knowing where I live and who I am and having my telephone number, that terrifies me. that literally terrifies me. And then relying on them to take my money and go and get my food without robbing my money, that also terrifies me. And you see where this puts me into a place of feeling vulnerable, feeling unsafe, feeling scared. And then that leads to me feeling anxious and worried and then stressed. And then that leads to, oh, they did come through for me. Oh, so the problem with the chemist wasn't just the problem with the chemist. The problem with the chemist was I kept having to send someone there. They couldn't get my medication. I kept going there. They couldn't give me my medication. And it was almost like, how do I trust you if you can't do this? Or why is this not going right? Or why am I unable to get it? And when you're already feeling vulnerable in a way because of the situations of having to rely on people to get you food and stuff, you're not allowed to go out, your independence is very much stripped away from you. The added pressure of not having your medication and worrying about getting sick is just too much. I tried to suppress it and pretend I was okay and was like, yeah, you know, guys, it's going to be fine. We're going to do study with me's and 1 hour study with me's every day at 6 o'clock and a hobby hour. In reality, I was thinking, oh my God, how am I going to cope? How am I going to cope? And I didn't cope because now I'm having to rely on people. And that scares me because I've never done it before. In my life, I realised that I am the only person who I can rely on. And when you can't even rely on yourself, what happens then? And so on Sunday evening, I actively planned how I would take my own life. I hung ropes and belts in several different ways to work out how much pressure would be required to pull a door shut with a person behind it, how much weight my front door could take. I've got a beam that goes from my front door, how much weight that could take, how much rope I would need to just make a loop and tie it up but without dropping me to the floor. That scared me. And so yesterday, as an outlet for the helplessness that I was feeling, I had a moan about the pharmacy. And it wasn't that I didn't appreciate the situation I was in, it was just that I was consumed and I needed to let it out, because if I didn't let it out, I was scared of what I would do when I'm impulsive, and I do get impulsions. If you don't know, I suffer from PTSD, so I get flashbacks, and when I get a flashback, that sends a pendulum doing this, and in doing that, I go from a wise mind to impulsivity like this. And when I'm impulsive, which is probably 5% of the time, it terrifies me. So I made, using the map that I've made with my psychologist, I've made a map of what triggered me. So at the top here are all of the things that are significant events in the last few months that I think might have exacerbated or made me relapse into a depression. About 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, I tried to take my own life. I ended up at the hospital, and then I ended up under the mental hospital, and I was at something called hospital at home, so it was hospital treatment but in my own home rather than me being in a hospital setting, because that would just make me more anxious, because now I'm in the hospital, which also scares me, and that helped. But I don't feel like at that time I was really ready to confront my childhood and what had happened, which is what I'm currently doing now. And by going through those distressing times, that can trigger me as well, so I think that hasn't helped. In May 2018, as Len got ill, I was very distressed. I spent 2 weeks nursing him, thinking he was going to die. I had 9 hours sleep in 2 weeks. I mean, it was horrendous. Eventually, the vet diagnosed him with having seizures, and a month later, edema. And he was put on medication, and he started to get better, but that made me scared. Then in January 2019, my resilizumab infusion was stopped, which left me feeling helpless, hopeless, and uncertain. Am I ever going to beat asthma? Am I ever going to be okay? That sort of thing. That same, about 2 weeks later, the 28th of January 2019, I had a car crash. I had no car for 4 days. I felt really scared and vulnerable. I felt angry that had happened. Yeah, I think the fact that it was a man that crashed into me and was quite abusive in the street as well, even though he was a military worker in a military truck. And I mean, this was a 15-ton tank that hit me, so I was quite scared about that. That triggered me in January 2019. At the start of the year, I think maybe just before New Year's Eve through into January, I had a throat infection, which took 3 weeks to get lost. I felt muzzled because I couldn't speak. I couldn't explain how I was feeling. And that was hard. And then I was still trying to take care of Aslan at that point. In March 2019, I had a hospital admission. It was really difficult discharge. I felt muzzled during the treatment that I had. No one was listening to me. No one could understand why I didn't want to take mirtazapine, topiramate, and amitriptyline at the same time. Given they all have a sedative effect, you would have put me in a pretty serious situation. And no one was listening to me, and I couldn't get anyone to understand. So I felt muzzled. I felt unsafe. I felt scared of it being overdosed, being killed by medication. I was tired. I was worried about Aslan because he hadn't been well. I want to go home and see him. April and May 2019, there was a glimmer of hope. Aslan was getting better. He had been in the best health he'd been in nearly a year. I was quite excited. I was happy, and I was like, perseverance really does prevail, and it really does pay off. And then in June 2019, he passed away. And I think this was my major trigger. So if you don't know who Aslan is, here he is. Yeah, that was my trigger. That morning, he had a seizure, and I did a video of it, and a lot of you saw that video. Now, he did suffer from partial epilepsy seizures, and he had a heart condition from birth, but he wasn't supposed to live till 2 and he lived to 10, so he did well. And I came home, I found him paralysed in the bedroom. He was screaming, he was so scared. That morning, I had given him his medication for his epilepsy because I didn't want him to have another seizure, because sometimes he has seizure after seizure after seizure. And that was upsetting. I didn't want to put him through that, so I gave him his seizure medication. I prioritised that. I then went to the shops to get him some pink salmon to make him feel better, to get some groceries. So I was gone maybe an hour. I came home, he was paralysed in the bedroom, screaming. He was scared, and he had to be put to sleep. I had to put him to sleep so he didn't suffocate or suffer anymore. He was completely cold in his back legs, like frozen cold, so cold. I felt like I had let him down. I felt like, had I given him his, and this is the crux of the situation, I feel guilty. I feel responsible for his death, because had I have given him his heart medication, he would not have developed a blood clot and he would not have died. But I didn't do that. And in hindsight, I wish I had. And so I carry this guilt of, you know, if I had just done something different, it would be here. And I think a lot of medics and a lot of doctors will know this feeling. You know, you have a patient who has multiple comorbidities and you have to prioritise which one you treat. And if you get something wrong or you don't get the right balance, they could die. And this is what happened with Aslan, and I felt like I didn't deserve him. I felt like I let him down. And then I felt guilt, I felt loss, I felt grief, but I also felt muzzled, and you'll probably hear the word muzzled a lot. So in the hospital in March last year, I felt muzzled. Again, when my cat died, I felt muzzled. I felt like I wasn't allowed to grieve. He's just a cat. Stop crying. You'll make yourself sick. Pull yourself together. Get over it. It's not a human being. I think about 20 people on social media unfollowed me. Then I was obviously let down by Rams, who decided to go on a rave rather than come and support me. You know, that's not what a spouse should do. And so then I had to go through a breakup as well, on top of feeling muzzled. I had to go through a breakup, and that was really hard. And that left me feeling like no one cared and like no one gave a shit. And then after he died, I felt lonely, I felt lost, I felt angry, and I bottled it all up inside. I bottled it all up. You know, I'm missing my boy. My home feels empty without him. I think I remember filming a video about that, and that's when I went and got my photos printed so I could put them in places he used to sleep. So it made me feel like, in a sense, he was still here. Then I got mittens, and there was some hope, because I had, you know, how can you not feel better when you've got a kitten that just seems to walk into walls and do crazy things and chew your feet, and it's just everywhere. So I felt guilty because I felt like I was replacing Aslan, but I wasn't. I just needed, you know, I had a home to give to a cat that could always be loved, and I gave it to him. I felt happy. I had cuddles, I had purring, playfulness. He's asleep on my things, twitching away on my lap, and that made me smile. And he made me laugh, and made me feel like I had a purpose again. Then he got sick, and he had a parasite from birth, and I started to get worried he might be sick. He was vomiting a lot, but he had treatment and it got better, and that was fine. And then my second trigger. So that was my first trigger, was Aslan and that situation. My second trigger came in September when I was admitted to hospital. And I was taken into resus, and the SPR in resus said that I should discuss having oxygen, because my oxygen saturation will not stay up. Every time they took the oxygen off me, my saturation just plummeted. So he said that I should be discussing that with my consultant, and I did. And then we had a misunderstanding because he thought I was asking for oxygen when I was actually told by the SPR to have a conversation about that. I'm only doing what the doctors told me to do. And my consultant clarified with the SPR that it was actually him that suggested the idea, and it wasn't me asking for something. So I did get an apology, but I was also looked after by someone that bullied me at school. Like, this woman punched me in the face a good 15-16 times, dragged me across the field by my hair. So you can imagine how I felt when I had that person caring for me in hospital when I was already vulnerable. She was sat at the nurse's desk laughing at me while staring at me. She was patronising me. I struggle in hospital a lot, in a way, with feeling safe. I struggle a lot with being vulnerable in a room full of strangers. It triggers my PTSD, especially if there's someone shouting or screaming, because I grew up in a household with a man that shouted and screamed, and then I would get my hair chopped off with a carving knife, or dragged downstairs by my hair, or thrown around, or punched, or kicked, or, you know, it was horrific. And so that triggers my PTSD. So I felt unsafe, I felt vulnerable, I couldn't sleep because of it, I was sleep deprived. Then I had my misunderstanding with my consultant, as I said. I got very upset about that. I discharged myself. I felt angry. I tried to suppress the anger. I exploded into a rage. Then I felt guilty because I had exploded and upset people, because I had been muzzled, because my consultant thought I was asking for the oxygen, did not listen to me, would not let me explain how I felt, which we were conversing over email, which did not help in that situation. I felt muzzled. And then I felt like I couldn't trust anyone. And then that whole muzzling, it seems to be that every time I get into a situation like this, it's muzzled. And those two things together, what I said is both them triggers together resulted in a loss of self-esteem. I felt like I had lost my self-belief. I felt like at the time I was supposed to sit the UCAT so that I could apply to medical school. Because I'd end up in hospital, I couldn't do that. And so I felt like my future had just been ripped away from me. I felt unsafe. I felt worried. I had a relapse of depression. I tried to speak to a doctor about my depression, but I was told, if you wear makeup, you can't possibly be depressed. Yeah. And then the self-harming started again. I've done this in the past. It started up again. And then suicidal thoughts. And those are the two main triggers that I think resulted in what happened. So here it is. And yeah, I think if you're ever in a situation where you're feeling in this way, just get a piece of paper, get a couple of post-it notes, write down the things that have been upsetting for you, the good things and the bad things, and then go through them, write about how you feel, and the trigger is going to be there. You're going to see it. You're going to know that that was your trigger because it's going to make you feel a certain way. But I recommend doing this either with a professional or when you're feeling a little bit better, because otherwise it might trigger you again. And then once you've worked out what your trigger is, and now I have worked out what my triggers are, we can focus on, was I to blame for him dying? Was this my fault? Was there anything I could have done about that? How would he want me to feel? All of those things. What would I say to someone else in that situation? The hospital admission, there's not really much I could do about that. But I've learned from that situation, if that ever happens and there's a nurse looking after me that I don't feel safe with, I can request someone else to take care of me, which I didn't realise I could before. And so that's that. And then by looking at things and looking at exit paths and exit strategies from those situations, can prevent me from being in the situation that I'm in now. And I'm really going to look at these two areas and see what I can do to prevent this happening again. But I just wanted to tell you that this is my trigger. This is what triggered me, and this is what led to me feeling like I needed to take my life on Sunday. Honestly, I highly recommend it, because it can really help you see where your problem is, and then once you know where your problem is, you can do something to help yourself. So mine has been pent up inside me for 9 months of feeling guilty and feeling like I caused a death. And then I went through a relationship breakup, which probably wasn't a trigger, but it was at the same time as I lost my cat. And so I was grieving for 2 losses at the same time, and that probably didn't help the situation, because when I needed support the most, I got nothing. And I was all alone and left vulnerable. And then the hospital admission, just a few months later, when I was still feeling very fragile and lost and not really sure what the world meant anymore. Because if you don't know, my cats mean the absolute world to me. I struggle a lot with trusting people because of my childhood, but I trust my cats, and my cats give me purpose. I mean, my cats as in that cat there that I had growing up. She died about 10 years ago now. maybe 11 years ago, I think it's 2009. Misty, Aslan, Mittens, they're my world, and they're everything to me. And so when they die, I find that really difficult normally. But then when they die because you made a mistake, God, is that grief hard, and it's hard not to beat yourself up about, and it's hard not to feel guilty. And then that guilt eats away at you. It just eats away at you. And this is why we're in the situation we're in now. But I've identified the problems. I've identified what emotions make me feel this way. And now that I've recognised that, I can hopefully change how I feel, and I can hopefully conquer the problem. So I highly recommend doing this if you can. And yeah, there's always someone to talk to. Reach out, call Mind if you can. I forgot Mind even existed when I was in this situation on the weekend. And just be kind to yourself, and just know that it's okay not to be okay, and you will get through it. And I can now see a light at the end of this tunnel. I think also the reason why it's so hard for me right now is because I am in the 1.5 million people category, where I have to self-isolate at home because of COVID-19 for 12 weeks, and I don't live with another human being. I don't have anyone that I could call, anyone I can talk to. I don't really have a supportive family network. I don't really have a lot of friends because of the trust issue. And so I'm very much on my own and very much isolated. And that's hard because I don't have anyone to help me, and the government don't seem to be coming through on their promises of the military will deliver your food, deliver you some medications, you'll have to pay for your food, but you can get food. That doesn't seem to be coming into fruition. And that's very stressful. I've been to the chemist. 18 days they've had my prescription. 18 days of my inhalers for my lung condition that I have that's severe. And I still do not have my prescription for my meds. Therefore, the fear of having an asthma attack and end up in the hospital, which also is a trigger, is very hard. And 18 days, and I've been out every single day to the pharmacy to pick up this medication. They keep telling me come back tomorrow, come back tomorrow. Yesterday, my GP went into the pharmacy and said, look, I've tried to phone you. This lady needs her medication. She needs it delivered to her, and she needs it delivered to her ASAP. So there's that. So hopefully that's coming today. And that will be okay. And then my asthma psychologist has been working with me. She's an amazing person, really understanding, and tells me that it's absolutely normal to feel upset and to feel angry and to feel scared given what I've been through in my life. And I don't use my childhood as an excuse. I've always suppressed that and been like, everyone has a hard childhood, but apparently they don't. And I never realised this. I just thought that my childhood was normal. And so I'm really coming into understanding that what happened to me was really bad. And then that leaves you feeling quite vulnerable. And confronting your past, a lot of it you don't even realise you've been through, because you just remember it as you're talking through your life. So from the first trauma to the next trauma, and then you realise that between there was another trauma, and you start realising things that you've been through that you were completely suppressed and forgotten about. And you kind of sit there, and it's like all these little pieces of shrapnel from what is an explosion sat in front of you, and you now have to deal with this mess. It's like my psychologist said, it's unpacking a wardrobe that's messy and all over the place, and looking at each item in depth and then folding it up and putting it back in the wardrobe and tidying up that wardrobe. And that's what I'm doing now, and that's really hard as well. But I'm hoping by the end of it I'll be able to feel a bit better and accept my past, and not be ashamed of it. I've never really used my past as an excuse. I've always actually used it to motivate me and encourage me and as a form of strength. But I think I didn't want to accept that happened to me, and therein lies the mental health problem. So thank you for watching. I hope this helps. Honestly, reach out for help if you're feeling shit, and take care. Stay inside.